Part of being successful as a college student is understanding how to act not only in an academic environment, but also a professional environment. Many of you are looking to get jobs or internships while you are in college, and most of you are in college in order to be more competitive for jobs after you graduate. So I'm going to give you skills in interviewing so that you can actually get those jobs, and then professionalism so that you can be successful in those jobs later. You're going to want to have available the handout, interview question, do's and don'ts. We're going to start by talking about interviews. The interview is the opportunity for the people in the organization to see if you're actually a good fit for the company and a good fit for the other people that you're going to be working with. You already have gotten past the initial screening. They've looked at your resume, determined you meet the minimum qualifications. So this is your opportunity to show that you're going to be a good employee, that you're a good communicator, and that you can really articulate how you're qualified for the position. With an interview, it is not just a one-day thing. It's not just the day of the interview where you're going to have to perform. You need to prepare ahead of time for the interview. It's very important that you spend time doing some research for understanding what the company is about, and you want to go ahead and look into the websites, and we'll talk a little more about that, but get a basic understanding of what the company is all about. Make sure you look at the job description. So if you haven't already, make sure you start saving job descriptions when you actually apply for a job, because there's nothing worse than getting offered an interview and going, I don't remember which job that was, and not having the job description. The job description is going to give you a lot of clues as to what they're looking for in a candidate. You also want to make sure you have the appropriate attire to wear to an interview. So we'll talk more about what that looks like, but you may need to go shopping. There are some low-cost options for you to buy an interview outfit. Goodwill is a good place to start. Ross, Dress for Less, or TJ Maxx often have low-cost options. H&M and Forever 21 sometimes have appropriate things that are generally fairly low cost. So this is something you're going to want to look into if you're in the process of applying for jobs. You also want to be ready professionally, and I'll talk about what that means, but there's a lot of other things besides just you being in the room for that interview. The lead up to the interview is also really important, and all the interactions that the employer has with you on your phone, your voicemail, etc. You also want to identify opportunities for you to practice. So there are resources on campus through the Career Center where you can work with a counselor to practice your interview skills, or you might just have a friend or a family member that's willing to sit with you and look over different interview questions and give you feedback. As I mentioned, it's important to understand the company before you go in for the interview. By understanding them, that you can get a sense of what they're looking for, what the culture is like, information about maybe the people who are interviewing you. All of this is going to give you a leg up in being successful in the actual interview itself. The first thing you should start with is the company website. Look at the mission statement. They generally will have that under the About Us section, and this is a overview of what they're really focused on. If they may also have a list of organizational values, which gives you clues about what they really focus on in terms of what's important to them, and the structure of the organization, so you get a sense of maybe who's going to be your boss, who you would be working under. All of these things will allow you to understand where the company's mind is so that you can tailor your answers to the interview questions to that information. You may also want to look at business journals. So business journals are essentially business news publications, and this may have up-to-date information about the company. If it's a smaller company, you may not find any information about them through the business journals, but larger companies, you'll generally be able to find that. So an example of a business journal locally is the Sacramento Business Journal. So you may want to search these for the company that you're interviewing at. Another option for you to look at is Glassdoor. Glassdoor is kind of like Yelp for companies. So it's a place where you can go and see how people feel about working at that company. But also people will include interview questions and how they answer them in the different section. So that's something that you can look at. You do need to create an account, and some access is limited unless you've put in a review of another company, but it is a really great resource for you to get started with. Do remember, like Yelp, it tends to be people who really don't like the company or people who really do like the company that tend to take the time to review. So, look at those with a grain of salt, and I would say really focus on the interview question section of it versus the reviews of the company, although it can give you a sense of whether this is a place you might want to work or not. Better Business Bureau, this is an organization that reviews companies, and if there's customers, they can make complaints to the Better Business Bureau. So this is a place where you can get some information about the company. And finally, LinkedIn. Most companies, especially larger ones, will actually have their own LinkedIn page, and that can give information of up-to-date events or new things that are happening at the company. They'll tend to post those on LinkedIn. It also gives you access to people who work there, so you can get a sense of who's there, what their backgrounds are, and again, that you can really tailor your interview answers to the information that you have. So you have no idea what kinds of questions they're going to ask you in the interview. I'm going to give you some information about general, very common interview questions, but they could come up with their own questions that have nothing to do with common interview questions. They could have things completely out of left field. So the best thing for you to do is to be very familiar with the job description and your own background and make connections between those two, because then you'll have this really in-depth understanding and up-to-date memorization of how you are qualified for the position. So what I usually suggest students do to prepare for their interview is to get out the job description, get out a highlighter and a pen, and highlight the key words in the job description, things that are really giving you a sense of what they are looking for and what's really important for that company or for that position. And then I want you to take the time to write down how you qualify for all of those key phrases. So look at the list of qualifications, look at the tasks that are required of the job, and come up with examples or stories that show that you meet that qualification, because in likelihood you're going to be talking about those kinds of things, or you might get asked a question to tell a story about a time when you had to work successfully as a team, for example. And if you thought about examples ahead of time, you won't be stuck when they ask you that question. It really helps you also successfully articulate your background and how it relates specifically to the job, because in an interview, you're not just talking about your background, you're talking about how your background connects to this specific position. So just like with a resume, you want to talk about how you fit that role and how you fit that organization, not just about your history. So as I mentioned, you're going to need to have the appropriate outfit for your interview. You want to match the formality to the company culture. So if you're going into, a business setting like a bank or, a consulting firm or something like that, you're going to want to dress formally. But if you're going to Home Depot for a part-time job, if you wear a complete suit, you might look a little out of place. You might want to do more like business casual. If people at Home Depot wear jeans and an apron, you're not going to wear that. You're going to go a step above what the company culture is like, but you don't want to stand out like a sore thumb in the interview. If in doubt, go a little more formal. But it's easy to get a sense of what the organization is like and what the work is like, and then you can kind of adjust what you wear to that. Do try and avoid things like cologne. This can be really annoying to somebody who might have an allergy to that or might be very sensitive to smell, and then they're not going to hear anything that you say. They're just going to be smelling your cologne the whole time or your perfume. So just don't wear any, but I would recommend deodorant. You aren't going to wear sleeveless shirts unless you have a jacket over it, and they wouldn't be able to tell that it's sleeveless. But if there's any chance you're going to take your jacket off, don't wear sleeveless. It's just not considered appropriate for an interview setting. Open-toed shoes are also something to avoid. You want to make sure that your shoes are closed-toed, and this is generally only a problem for the ladies, but I've seen people wear sandals or flip-flops to an interview, even guys. So you are going to want to have closed-toed appropriate shoes, and if you are in a more formal setting, it's going to be likely some dress shoes. Your hair should be neatly groomed. So if you're a girl and you have a tendency of playing with your hair, or if it kind of gets in your face, you may want to put it back into a bun or some other updo to get it out of the way. If you're a man with longer hair, I would recommend putting it in a ponytail or a bun. It just looks a little bit neater. Girls can get away with having their hair down as long as it's not distracting. Basically, you just want it to be out of your face so that they can really focus on your answers instead of your hair. For most interview settings, you're going to be wearing dress shoes. Some dress shoes need to be polished. I heard some anecdotes from employers that look at your shoes first, because if you put in the effort to make your shoes look nice and that attention to detail, it shows that you might have attention to detail on the job. So you will want to make sure that any scuffs or anything like that are taken care of. Some shoes don't require polishing, so in that case, don't worry about it. Jewelry. If you're wearing jewelry, just make it not distracting. So if you have, bracelets that tend to bang against the table or jangle, that might distract the interviewers from your actual answers. Or if it's really large jewelry, again, that can be distracting. If you have piercings other than just your, earlobes, you may want to take those out. So what you're trying to do in an interview is to appeal to the widest possible audience, because you do not know what that person's preferences are. So some people are okay with piercings, some people don't really like them, so you want to play it safe. If you have tattoos, ideally you would cover them. In most cases, that should be fairly easy. You just wear long sleeves, and you might wear a higher collar. Again, it's playing to that all possible audiences, because some are more conservative than others, and you just don't know how conservative that person across the table from you is. In terms of your outfit, what to actually wear. So business formal, which is what you mostly will wear to interviews, unless it's a casual setting like my example of Home Depot. You would wear solid, dark, or neutral colors. So usually that's going to be black, gray, or navy blue, and you will wear a suit. So for men, it's pretty straightforward. You have a suit jacket, a collared shirt, a tie, and pants, and they're all the same color. For girls, there's more options. So there are skirt and jacket combinations, pants and jacket combinations, or you can have a very business-like dress with a jacket over it. But generally, you're going to have a blazer no matter what, and it's up to you how you want to approach the skirt or dress or pants issue. Do make sure that it is actually business attire. I've seen students come in to interviews in skirts that are really made for clubbing. They're made out of a stretchy material, and it's not meant for interviews. So just because it hits you above the knee and it looks like a pencil skirt doesn't mean it's actually business attire. So the fabric matters. So make sure that things aren't too tight, or it's not something that you're supposed to wear out on a night on the town versus an interview. So for what to wear under your blazer or your jacket, you're going to want to wear a lighter neutral color, something not distracting. So white is very safe, but you could also wear pastels. You want to avoid really bright colors or loud prints, again, because it can be distracting. And your tie, for the gentleman, you should wear something that is pretty neutral, nothing with Bugs Bunny on it or anything. So you should have matching jacket and pants or skirt if you're a girl for business formal. Business casual is a little bit different. You can wear, a different colored blazer, or you might just wear a button-up shirt with a tie and no jacket. So that would be for a less formal setting. Make sure you have your cell phone off, and you're going to want to carry a professional looking bag or a professional looking portfolio So the whole picture is good. So if you had, a backpack, but this nice dress suit, it's not really going to go together. So you want to try and get something that's a little bit more, professional looking. So professional readiness. When I talk about this is just being ready for interactions with people in a work setting. So this is everything from your email address to you actually walking into the interview. So you're going to want to make sure that when you're applying for jobs, your address is something appropriate and professional. So something with just your name and maybe some numbers or your first and last name. You don't want something like I love shoes 55 because it doesn't really give a mature and professional image. Also, your voicemail, your phone message, you're going to want to make sure first of all, your voicemail is set up, because if it's not, they can't call to offer you an interview, and often employers will actually call you to offer an interview. They're not going to text you. You're going to want to make sure that they're not going to have to sit through, a song or a joke on your voicemail message. Just a very nice formal voicemail message is going to be the best. And you will want to do a real message versus, the standardized thing that comes on your cell phone that just says your phone number, because then they'll know it's you, and it'll be more engaging, and they'll feel more connected to you. Do remember that you need to clean out your voicemail inbox now and again. I have called students to offer them interviews, and their voicemail inbox has been full, and there's, I can follow up with an email, but I am already annoyed at you because I'm trying to offer you an interview and I couldn't get through to you. So just make sure that all of that is ready to go if you're in the process of applying for jobs. When you walk into an interview, you want to have a portfolio or some nice professional looking folder, because you're going to bring copies of your resume, copies of your reference page, which is a list of the people that they may call to check on your qualifications, so old bosses and coworkers. So you'll have copies of those for them for the interview. You will also have a list of questions that you want to ask at the end of the interview, because interviews are a two-way street. You are going to want to ask them some questions, and usually you're going to have that printed out so you can actually write on that. And if you need notes or have a notepad or something, all of those will be in a portfolio. So there's an example of what a professional portfolio looks like right here on the slide. But if you can't afford one of those nice zipper portfolios, you can buy a nice folder, maybe from the student store or something like that. When you're offered an interview, make sure you confirm the location, time, who you're meeting with, and the expected interview length. This sounds like a no-brainer, but sometimes when you're nervous, you forget to confirm all of those things, and then you go, oh, I didn't write down what time it was, or oh, I didn't get the address. So just make sure you confirm all of that. You will want to make sure that you check what the traffic is like at the time of your interview. So when you're traveling, you do not want to get stuck in traffic and be late for an interview. That is one of the worst things you can do. Very, very bad first impression, being late for an interview. My suggestion is to plan so that you can get there 20 to 30 minutes early. And you can use Google Maps to do this. They actually have information on typical traffic times during the day. So that can really help you plan it out so that you can get there 20 to 30 minutes early. Do not walk in to the building 20 to 30 minutes early. That's just going to be awkward. You're going to be sitting there for a long time getting nervous. It's going to make everybody else around you nervous. This is just so if something does happen, you have a little bit of leeway time. It gives you time to calm down in your car, review your notes, find parking if you need to do that. So it's giving you a buffer. For the actual interview, I say go in 10 to 15 minutes before the interview is scheduled to begin. So I lean on the side of 10 because for me, if I'm sitting there for 15 minutes, I start to get nervous. So 10 minutes is probably the best for most people. So you'll go in, find the location, and then 10 minutes before you'll walk in. If you go in the building a little early, you can always go in the bathroom, calm yourself down, check your hair, check your outfit, and then walk into the actual interview location with the 10-minute buffer there. Interviewers are going to be looking for certain things when you come in. So as I mentioned, they've already determined that you meet the minimum qualifications. So they already know that you can do the basics of the job. So right now they're trying to figure out if they actually want to work with you for the next however many years interviewers. So they are going to be looking for appearance. They want to see that you look professional, like you care about the job, that you put yourself together. That may not be an indicator of how good you are, but it does show an attention to detail and a certain amount of professionalism. They will look for good eye contact. This is cultural. Not all cultures are as into eye contact as we are in the United States, but if you're interviewing for a job in the United States, they are going to look that you're looking them in the eye. So that doesn't mean you have to stare them down the whole time, right? But you shouldn't be looking down at the table or off to the side every time you answer a question. If you have a tendency to not be able to make eye contact, I would suggest practicing with a friend or maybe somebody at the Career Center ahead of time, because this is something that does show confidence and engagement, and interviewers really like that. They are also just looking for a general sense of confidence. So they want the idea that you know what you're doing, you know what you're talking about, you're confident in your own abilities, and some of this will come from the way you hold yourself and the way you speak. So make sure you don't mumble. If you want to speak clearly, not so loud that you're going to hurt someone's ears, but you want to speak clearly and really articulate your points. Also, you want to sit up straight. When you're in an interview situation, don't slouch in the chair like this. You want to sit up straight, and usually you're going to have your hands clasped on the table, and you're going to lean forward a little bit. Looks a little weird in my camera, but when you lean forward a little bit, it makes them feel like you're really engaged with them, and that is a good feeling to leave them with. They're also going to look for enthusiasm. They want you to be excited about the job. They can teach basic skills in most jobs, but they cannot teach enthusiasm. People who don't care about the job and aren't excited about the job tend to not do very well, not put in a lot of effort or a lot of work, whereas somebody who's really enthusiastic about it, they're going to work hard. So they're looking for that. So you want to figure out what parts of this position really relate to you, that you're really interested in, and be able to articulate that. Even if it's just a part-time job to help you pay the bills, find something you like about the organization or about the position itself and be able to say that, because they're looking for that kind of thing. They also will look for you to smile. This is a professional situation, and a lot of students go in thinking, I have to put my very formal hat on and my formal face, and I'm not going to smile. But actually, again, they're trying to determine if they want to work with you. Do you want to work with somebody who never smiles? Probably not. So you want to make sure that you smile at appropriate times, especially when you meet them. That first impression is important, as we'll discuss a little bit later. But when you get excited about a point, or when you're talking about experience that you have that you really like, it's an appropriate time to smile. So don't think that you have to be just this completely formal robot. They're also looking for ambition. So this doesn't mean somebody who's going to take their job, right? Because usually it's going to be your potential future boss interviewing you. But they want you to want to add something to the organization. They want you to want to do well. So they may ask you something about your short-term and long-term goals, or where you want to be in 5 years. You want to make sure you have an appropriate answer to that. Don't say, I want your job in 5 years, but you want to say, I want to increase this, the sales for our department by 5% by using new sales tactics. Or I'd like to, eventually move up through gaining more experience, once I'm deemed ready for that role. So, showing some ambition is a good thing without being threatening to the person who's interviewing you. So now that you know how to prepare for an interview, we're going to talk about different types of interviews. So there are a lot of different ways that you can be interviewed. One of the first ways that we're going to talk about is telephone or Skype or some other digital long distance interview. And this is often used as a screening device. So they will ask you a few questions to get a sense of whether you'd be a good fit, because they'll often have a lot of applicants, and to take the time to schedule all of these applicants to come in and have a one-on-one interview in person can take a lot of time. So the telephone is like an easy, less time-consuming way for them to determine whether they actually want to talk to you in person. Sometimes that will be the full interview, say you're out of state, or maybe that's just the way they're doing it. But most of the time it's going to be a first interview as a screening device. Another type of interview, the one you probably most think of when you think of interviews, is one-on-one. So it's you and the person with the hiring power. So this may be your future boss or maybe somebody above your future boss, and they have all the power to decide who they're hiring. So this is pretty straightforward. They'll ask you questions, you answer the questions, but it can be intimidating for some people to just be talking to this one person with the power to hire them. Another type of interview is a panel interview. So this is when you have several people across the table from you, all of which are going to have a part in determining who gets hired. So it's you with, 2 or more people across the table. The biggest thing to remember with a panel interview is that you want to make sure that you are answering the question to all of the people there. So you're not just looking at the person who asked the question. You want to make sure that you look at everybody. And you don't have to do it in a very pronounced way, but because they all have a part in making the decision, you want them to all feel included when you're answering the questions. Another thing with a panel interview is it can be a little intimidating when there's several people across the table from you, but it can also help to create some conversation and some connection with people in a way where one-on-one might be a little more intimidating. A group interview is where it's you and other candidates for the position. So you're going in with your competition. The thing to remember with a group interview is that you want to try and answer questions a little bit different than the last person did if you can. You also want to acknowledge the other people in the room. So, just like Joe said, I also have experience in sales. I've worked in this position for 3 years. It's nice if you can acknowledge the people in the room because that shows that you have a connection and can, be a team member and be a good communicator. If somebody gives a similar answer to what you were going to say, don't freak out. Just maybe make it a little bit more your own or add a little bit on or use an example from your background because nobody has the exact same background as you. So you can say, well, similarly to Susan, I also think that working in groups is one of my favorite ways of approaching my work. For example, in my last position, I worked on a project with a team of 5 and then tell them about that. There's also something called a serial interview. So this is where you are going to have several interviews in a row separately with different people. So this can sometimes be really long. You might meet with a department head and then meet with the division head and then maybe meet with your potential team, and they're all one after another. The big thing to remember with this is that you will feel like you might be repeating yourself, but that last person heard what you had to say, but these people haven't yet. So it's okay to repeat yourself a little bit. And it's also really important to do some self-care, right? To take care of yourself, make sure you eat if they give you a chance to do that, because these can be long and a little bit tiring. You may also have an opportunity to interview over a meal. So if this is happening, you want to make sure that you are applying mealtime etiquette, things like, not putting your elbows on the table, not speaking with your mouth full, and you want to choose a meal item that won't be messy or difficult to eat. So, a lot of people think, oh, a salad, but actually salads kind of get all over your face and they're kind of messy. So you may want to choose something that you can cut into small pieces, which also gives you time to answer questions in between, or something that is easy to take individual bites of. So, do be mindful of your choices. For those of you who are of drinking age, and if you're applying for a job where there's a meal situation, do not order a drink. If the interviewer orders a bottle of wine and offers you some wine, then, it's appropriate to take a little bit of it, but you do not want to overdo it, obviously. In terms of paying for the meal, generally they're going to pay for the meal, but don't make assumptions. Say, oh, do that little fake, oh, can I contribute? And they're going to say, no, and they'll pay for it 99% of the time. So, it can be awkward with the meal situation. So read a little bit on mealtime etiquette and try and follow There's also something called a practical interview. So this can take a lot of different forms, but this would be something where they actually have you do something. And this can be combined with other types of interviews as well. So for example, I went on an interview where I had the normal panel interview and a one-on-one interview, but then I had to write a report and show them my writing skills. So they put me in a room with a computer with a prompt that I had to respond to. So you may have this kind of practical piece of your interview. So I know, for example, sometimes doctors or firefighters will be given scenarios that they have to follow through on, and that's part of the interview. So if you are anticipating that, think about what kind of scenarios they might ask you to do, and if you can practice for them, great. If you can't, just make sure you're well versed in the technical information and material related to your position. So for all of these, the style of the interview might be formal or informal. So a formal interview is going to be generally a situation where the interviewers, the panel, or the individual interviewer has a list of questions that they're going to stick to. They're just going to ask those questions, and they're not going to ask a lot of follow-up. There's not going to be a lot of conversation, and it's going to be very, very clear-cut. This is often happens in government settings or educational settings where there's actually regulations about fairness in the interview. So they say you have to just ask this question, do not ask any follow-ups. Even some interviews will tell you don't smile too much at one interviewee versus another to try and make it as fair as possible. That's generally not going to be the case, but I've heard of even community colleges saying that, really trying to level the playing field. Sometimes you will have a formal interview where they might ask follow-up questions, but it generally is this prepared set of questions. An informal interview will be a little bit different. So they might have a few questions they're going to ask you, but it'll be more of a conversation. Sometimes they'll just have your resume in front of them. And they'll say, so I see here that you worked at McDonald's for a few years. Can you tell me a little bit about that? Or, so why are you interested in this role? I just want to hear about your background. So it'll be a little more conversational. They'll ask follow-up questions. It'll maybe be a little bit more meandering than a formal style interview. So you need to be prepared for either of these. Some people really like the formal interview style because it's more straightforward and they're nervous about casual conversation. Some people like the informal style because they feel like they're just talking to a normal person instead of being interrogated. So you just don't really have a sense, or there's no way for you to know what style of interview it is, but do try to adapt depending on the style, because if you're very formal in an informal interview, it might look a little strange. There are various types of questions that may be asked in an interview, and you're generally going to get a combination of these, and I'm going to go over them briefly so you have a sense of what you might expect in an interview setting. The first type of question is generally open-ended questions. So these are designed to help them learn more about you. There's no right or wrong answers. These really are an opportunity for you to talk about your qualifications and how they relate to the job. And some examples of this might be, tell me about yourself. What can you bring to this job that others can't, or where do you see yourself in 5 years? So these are opportunities for you to explore yourself, your qualifications, your fit with the company. There are sometimes closed-ended questions in interviews. So these are generally yes or no type questions, or questions where they're gonna want one answer. So how many chest compressions do you do to 2 breaths in CPR, for example? That would be a closed-ended question. And examples of this might be, do you have a valid driver's license? Or do you possess a valid CPR certification? Or are you willing to drive clients around? Or do you have a clean driving record? So these ones are pretty straightforward, but you need to be familiar with your driving record and things like that if it relates to the job. Behavioral questions. These can be the toughest sorts of questions. So these questions are situational, and they're going to ask you to describe what you have done in the past. So the idea behind these is that the past is the best predictor of future success. So they'll say something like, describe a situation in which you had to work under pressure with a team and how did you handle this challenge. So you have to tell a story. Or it might be, tell me about a time you had a conflict with a coworker. How did you handle it? So these can be hard to prepare for, which is why I tell you to do that preparation where you write down examples next to all the qualifications and tasks that are listed on the job description. Because if you have some stories already in your head related to the job description, they're generally going to ask you questions that do relate to the job description. So you'll have a sense of how to answer these, or at least some stories in your back pocket that you might use. Occasionally, you're not going to have a story that relates to that. So maybe tell me about a time when you turned in an assignment late. Maybe you've never turned in an assignment late. Good for you, first of all. But you say, that's actually never really happened to me, but I can tell you about a time that, I got pretty close to the deadline and here's how I handled it. Or, I think this other example illustrates what you're trying to get at. Or if I was going to miss the deadline, here's how I would handle it. So there are ways of doing that in case you don't have a story that really fits their question. Case study, problem solving, or hypothetical questions. So these are really related to analysis or action planning or addressing problems that might actually come up in the job. So they're trying to look at your ability to do problem solving. Sometimes these are going to be really weird. So you get questions like, how many palm trees are in the Los Angeles area? And they don't really expect you to know how many palm trees are in the Los Angeles area. They just want to see how you work it through. They're really looking at your thought process and how you analyze things. Sometimes it'll be more straightforward. So here's an example. The firm has assigned you to consult a company intending to drop a product or expand into new markets in order to increase revenue. What steps would you take to help this company achieve its objectives? So really coming up with a plan of how you would do this. So these, again, can be hard because you're on the spot, but often they'll give you a little bit of time to think it through, and they're really watching how you think it through. So it's okay to do that. There are also sometimes technical questions. So this is related to just pure competencies that are needed for the job. So things like, what development tools have you used? What software have you used to work with student clients? Or compare and contrast the effectiveness of digital media and print media. So these are very specific, related to the technical aspects of the job. And so it's important for you to have prepared to understand the technical needs of the position, especially if they mention it in the job description. So as students, sometimes you're going to be applying for internships or campus jobs. In these situations, they're going to think of you as a student first, and they may ask you academically focused questions. Generally, in a standard job interview where it's a career-related position, they're not going to ask as many of these, but an internship interview or an on-campus job interview or work-study job interview, they think of you as a student and want to see how this position will relate to your future goals, and they want to learn a little bit about your academics. So they may ask you questions like, how have you managed your research projects? Or in the past, what types of quantitative research have you implemented? Or what kind of classes have you found challenging and how did you overcome that? Or why did you choose this particular major? So be ready to answer those, especially with internships. They'll often ask, how does this internship relate to your field of study and your future career goals? So they're really trying to look at how it fits in with you as a student. Sometimes they'll ask you questions about motivation or your goals. So they're trying to figure out what your vision is, where you're going to go. They don't want to hire somebody who's going to leave after a year because they've just been training you for a year. So they are seeing this as an investment. Where do you see yourself in this organization, or where do you see yourself in 5 years? Those kinds of questions, you need to be prepared to answer those. And your answer should relate at least somewhat to that position. So the best answer for a career level position is, I would see myself here in a position or in a position like this, where I have really implemented new changes that have improved the organization or increased sales numbers, or I've gotten out of a junior position into a journeyman level position or something like that. They want to see your ambition, they want to see where you're going, and they want to figure out if you're going to stick around. That's a little bit different with internships or campus jobs. They don't expect you to be there in 5 years, so they want to see how it relates to your future goals, and that's how you would answer it. The beginning of the interview is a very important part of the interview. When you come into an interview, the first impression is going to be crucial. They've actually had studies that have shown that an interviewer makes up their mind about the candidate of whether they want to hire them or not within the first 5 minutes of the interview, and then the rest of the time they're just trying to justify that decision. You can change their mind, certainly, but it is difficult after that first impression. So in addition to your appearance, your eye contact, your smiling, it's also important that you have a good greeting. When you come in, make sure you shake everyone's hand, unless it's a panel of like 12 people where it'd be completely awkward. You want to make sure you shake all the panel members' hands. Greet everybody. Be pleasant to people, not just the people who are interviewing you, everybody you come into contact with within, 10 miles of the organization. Don't cut people off in traffic. You never know. It could be one of the interviewers on the way over to the building to interview you. Say hi to the receptionist. Be very pleasant to everybody. Turn your cell phone off. There's nothing worse than getting a phone call in the middle of an interview, and we can hear vibrating phones as well. So just completely turn it off, because it makes somebody feel like, oh, you're not as important as the cell phone or as this other person. So all of those things are really important. Make sure when you shake people's hands, it is a firm handshake. So you want to make sure it's web to web. I can't really show you because I have two opposite hands. So don't, shake hands like this. And make sure it's firm but not breaking somebody's hand. And then you also want to make sure, if you tend to get sweaty hands, take some time to wipe them off in your pockets or something like that, so that it does not leave, a little bit of moisture, which is not the best good impression for the first few minutes you meet somebody. One of the most common questions you're going to get in an interview, usually at the very beginning, is something like, tell me about yourself, or give us a little bit about your background, or we'd like to learn a little bit about you, or tell me how your previous work experience relates to this job. So these big overview questions. A big mistake that people make with tell me about yourself is that they tell their whole life story. Tell me about yourself isn't really looking for you to say, I grew up in Benicia, I have one sister, my parents are, artists. They're not looking for that information. What you're really trying to do is to give an overview of your educational background, your work experience, any interests that relate to the job, and connect them to the job requirements. You are given some time to give them a thesis statement, essentially, of how you qualify for this job. And this is a good time to make sure you hit some basic bullet points about how you qualify, just in case they don't ask questions that allow you to talk about them later. So it isn't going to be a super, super long answer, but you want to have these basic things that you make sure you want to hit. So this is part of your interview preparation is, if I get asked, tell me about myself, what points do I want to make sure they know about me? I want to make sure that they know I have administrative experience. I want to make sure that they know I'm presented to large groups. I want to make sure that they know that I'm really interested in public media or whatever. So articulating both your background and your education and how they relate to the job, but also your interest in the position. So be ready to have specific things about why you're interested. They may also ask you questions that, again, will ask you to explore big questions about yourself, like why did you choose this field, or why should we hire you, or why do you want to work for us, or what are your greatest strengths and weaknesses. So things like, why did you choose this field? Be ready to answer that. Why do you want to go into marketing? What's the story behind that? Why does it interest you? Because remember, they're looking for enthusiasm, so you want to be able to articulate why you're interested. Also, why should we hire you? So sometimes that can intimidate people, or sometimes they'll ask you things like, why should we hire you above other candidates? Don't focus on the other candidates. Focus on what you specifically have to offer that role. And if you have something unique to share, maybe you're applying for a counseling position, but you also have some great technical skills that would help with their client database. Put that in there. Why are you better than other candidates? Well, maybe other candidates have that. You don't know that for sure, but it's basically selling yourself to the organization. Why do you want to work for us? You need to be ready for this question. I've interviewed a lot of people, and this is where a lot of people stumble. If you don't know specific things about the organization and about the position that are good reasons for why you want to work there, it will make you look uninformed about the role, and also, take away that enthusiasm piece. We want to know that you know what you're applying for. We want to know that you know what our organization does. So I'll give you an example. We had somebody applying for a career counseling position at the internship at Career Center at UC Davis, and when we asked, why do you want to work for us, they talked about really being interested in academic advising. We don't do any academic advising at the Internship and Career Center, and a cursory review of our website would let them know that. So you want to make sure that this relates back to the research you did on the organization. Sometimes you can use the mission statement in your answer. You can say, well, I know that your mission is really to help underserved kids, and that's something that I've been interested in for years, and my background is really related to that, and can get into more detail about that. But really having specifics about why you want to work for them is important. The strengths and weaknesses question. This is probably the question that everybody is the most scared of. I actually had a class of about 90 students, asked them all to write down the question that they were the most worried about in an interview, and I'd say about 85% of them put the strengths and weaknesses question. Strengths is a little bit easier. What do you have to offer? Are you a really good communicator? Are you really good at programming in C++? Are you really great at presenting? It's easier to identify strengths. Always start with strengths. Don't start with your weakness, because you want to start on a positive note. The weakness one is a little bit harder. So for the weaknesses, there's a bit of a formula to do this. You want to identify a weakness that is real. So don't say something like, I'm a workaholic, or I'm a perfectionist. These are very cliched, and they're going to roll their eyes at you. I had another career counselor say, well, I always answer that with my weakness is for chocolate. But I think most interviewers would be like, no, really, what is your weakness? What they're trying to determine is that you know what your weaknesses are, because you're human, right? Everybody has weaknesses, and that you will overcome them, and that they will not be a problem for the organization. So that's how you're going to want to answer it. So you would say something like, real tangible but small weakness, and not something that's crucial to the job. So if you're applying for a political position where you have to do a lot of speaking, you're not going to want to say, I'm not a very good public speaker, right? But if you're applying for an accounting position, that wouldn't be a bad weakness to include, because you're not doing a lot of public speaking. So pick something real, and then you're going to say, not that it's a weakness, but something that I'm working on is my public speaking skills. Then you want to identify how you're working on it. So I've been employing different speaking techniques and volunteering for speaking opportunities at work so that I can improve my skills. I also joined the Toastmasters Club to work further on my public speaking. So if I'm asked to speak in this position, I think I will be able to overcome, my nervousness with public speaking, and be able to do it in this role. So basically, you're reassuring them that, yeah, I have this weakness. Maybe it's not my favorite thing, or something I'm working on is like the best way to phrase it. Something I'm working on is this. I'm making sure that it won't be a problem for you. And that's how you're going to want to approach the weakness question. It's a tricky one, but it allows you to actually really kind of get into ways that you work to improve yourself. So I mentioned the tell me about yourself question and how you should approach it. But here's some examples of how you might put together a prepared answer for this question. So it can be useful to focus on the present, the past, and the future. So what are you doing now? What have you done in the past? And what do you hope to gain from this position? Why are you excited about this role? What are you interested in about this role? And really connect to the position. So I'll let you guys take some time to read this on your own, but this is an example of how you might approach the tell me about yourself question. Behavioral questions. So as I mentioned, these can be a little hard because you have to tell a story. You want to make sure that you choose a story that has a happy ending and some action that you actually took that demonstrates your ability to do well in this position. So you can use the SAR or SAR method to answer these sorts of questions. First, you want to identify the situation or the problem that you were able to solve. So think of a situation that you're involved in that had a positive outcome, and then think about the action that you took. So you need to actually explain what you did. If everything was taken care of by your team or your boss, you want to think of a different example. So you want to be specific about what you did in order to complete the task and to achieve the results you're looking for. And then the results. So what happened? Hopefully a happy ending. You really don't want to do something that is not a happy ending. So an example of this might be if someone asked you, describe a situation in which you worked successfully with a team in order to solve a problem at work. You might say, well, we had a project where we had a very sensitive client that needed a lot of hand-holding, and I was working with a team of 3 in order to make sure that we got their design for their landscaping done on time and to their specifications. So that's the situation. The action you took is myself and my team set up specific times to meet, and in addition to that, we were able to create a communication and action plan in order to make sure that we were all on the same page as we worked on different components of the landscape design, and we made sure that we emailed and called each other on a fairly regular basis and shared different pieces of the design through the design software that we use. Additionally, 2 of us were dedicated to making sure that we kept the client up to date. So we were able to really split the tasks evenly, make sure we communicated, and we're all on the same page and able to move it forward in a timely manner. Then the result would be something like we were able to get the design together ahead of schedule. We presented it to the client. The client was very happy with it and has actually brought us new business. So situation, the difficult client, we had to short deadline, the action, all of those things, the communication plan, the way that you divided the work, the dealing with the client, and then the result, which is the actual happy client. So now that you have a grasp on the kinds of questions that might come up in an interview and some approaches to deal with difficult questions, I'm going to leave you with a few general tips about how to be successful in an interview process. First of all, make sure you listen carefully before answering. I have been in many interviews where I can tell that the person didn't really listen to the question and they go off on a tangent talking about something that has nothing to do with what I asked them. That never looks good in an interview. The other thing you want to think about is sometimes the words that are used to ask you the question is not the full story. So like my example of tell me about your greatest weakness, they're not actually looking for your greatest weakness. Let's say you have a problem with getting things done on time. Maybe you don't want to use that. Maybe that is a really big weakness for you, but what they really want to know is how you overcome things that may get in your way. So don't just talk about the weakness. You want to talk about overcoming it. So try and read between the lines when they ask you questions. So sometimes you get weird questions like, if you could be any animal, what animal would you be and why? Well, they don't really care about what animal you would be. They're trying to get a sense of your character and, what the animal says about you. So you want to remember that they're trying to determine if you're a good fit. So talk about, not just the animal. You love dogs because they're so cute. You want to say, well, dogs are, very loyal and they're good communicators. And I really think that that's something that I value in a work environment. And so you're reading between the lines and always connecting it back to the job. Sometimes you'll mishear the question or you won't hear the question. It's okay to ask them to repeat it. Better to ask them to repeat it than to kind of make something up, not knowing what the question is. You'll want to keep your answers brief, but not too brief. I get asked a lot, how long should my answers be? And that just depends on the question. So it's hard to tell you exactly, but you want to make sure that you're giving them a good overview of your experience and who you are as a person. I sometimes say, well, it should be, 1 paragraph to 2 paragraphs spoken. But again, that's going to depend on the question. It depends on what you determine as a paragraph, but I'm saying like a good, chunky paragraph. Too brief would be something like, if I asked you, well, why do you want this job at our veterinary clinic? And you can say, because I really like working with animals. That's not enough information. I want to know, what is it about this veterinary clinic? Why do you have this love of animals? What kind of experience do you have that prepares you to work with animals? So give more information. On the other hand, I've had a person in an interview for one of the positions at my previous role where he talked so much that we were looking at the clock and we were getting bored. So if you get the sense that your interviewers are having body language, verbal or facial cues that maybe you're talking a little much, try and wrap it up quickly. If you're not certain if you've fully answered their question, it's okay to ask. So if you answered, kind of briefly and you're not getting a lot of nods, or if you're not sure if you gave them enough information, it's okay to say something like, does that answer your question? Or is there any more information that you need? And they'll generally be able to tell you. Sometimes in really formal interviews, they won't be able to answer that question, but most of the time they'll be able to say, yeah, actually, could you tell me a little bit more about your experience with this, if they need more information. Don't do that after every question, though, because it won't leave a good impression. Sometimes you won't know the answer to a question, or you won't know how to answer a question. The first thing you should do is to ask for a little bit of time. And this is about as long as you have, and I'll give you an example. So you'd say something like, oh, that's a really good question. I'd like to think about that for a second. That's about as long as you have before it gets awkward. So it's about 7 seconds. So, hopefully you'll get an answer in that amount of time and then just be able to smoothly answer the question. But if you don't, the next thing you can do is you can say, I'd like to think about that a little bit more if you don't mind. Do you mind if we come back to the question? With any luck, they'll forget about it and you won't have to answer it. But if they do come back to it, at least you've had some time to think it over. And sometimes future questions will give you some ideas of how you might answer that previous question that you got stumped with. You also will want to make sure you have questions to ask them. At the end of an interview, the interviewer will generally say, do you have any questions for us? And you should always say yes and have some prepared questions. There is a handout for you, the do's and don'ts interview handout. On the last page of that, it actually has some sample questions that you can ask at the end of an interview. Things like, what is the company culture like? What are the greatest challenges of the position? You should always ask, what is the timeline for your decision? Because then you know when you need to follow up by. But there's a variety of questions you can ask. The one thing you shouldn't ask about is salary. Do not ask about salary until a job offer is made. One, it's kind of uncouth to talk about money too early, but also once an offer is made, that is the best point to negotiate the salary. Sometimes they'll bring up salary. What are your salary requirements? And you're going to want to give them a range. Never give them one number. Or even better, you can say, I'd like to wait until offer to discuss salary, if that's okay with you. Because in negotiation, the first person to say a number is in the lower position. Finally, you will always, always, always want to send a thank you note. It is perfectly fine to send an email thank you note, so you're going to want to do that. Your thank you note is an opportunity for you to reiterate your qualifications for the role and, of course, thank them for their time. You want to do this within 24 hours of the interview, ideally, so they get it in a prompt manner. If somebody else sends a thank you note and you don't send a thank you note, and they're weighing you guys as the two possible candidates, they'll probably go with the person that sent the thank you note. So don't leave this step out. So now that you have a sense of how to interview and you're all going to be incredibly successful interviewers and get your dream jobs, I'm going to talk a little bit about how to be professional once you get that job. Many of you will have your first job while you're a college student. You may work on campus, you might have a work-study job, you may have an internship. We get a lot of feedback from employers that students are not as professional as they would like. They just don't know how to purport themselves in a professional setting. So I'm going to give you some basic tools and knowledge to understand what it's like to transition from a college student to the professional world, and give you some tools in order to make sure that you don't commit any faux pas or piss off your new boss. So the first thing we'll do is we're going to do a quick little write-up. So if you can get out a piece of paper and just pause the video, and I want you to brainstorm a little bit how you think your life will change when you make the transition from a student to an employee. So all of you did your quick write, and I'm going to go over some things that are going to change, and you may recognize some of these in your quick write, but you may have some things that I don't cover, because it is very different from being a student to being a professional. I remember when I started in the world of work, I said, oh man, I don't have as much free time. All my schedule is very set, and it was a little bit of a shock. So this is something that I'm hoping to prepare you for so that you can be ready when this happens. So some things that are going to change for you generally is sleep. So, students are known as not getting enough sleep because they party or they're studying all night, but overall their average is actually higher than somebody who is in a professional environment. So students on average get about 8.3 hours of sleep. And professionals get about 7.7. And this probably has to do with the fact that they have a little bit less free time. So they get home around 5 and they have to cook dinner and do any, chores or anything that need to happen. And sometimes that pushes into sleep time, and then they have to get up early to go to work and sometimes have a commute. So this is where, your sleep gets reduced a little bit. In terms of the way we dress, and I'm going to show you some examples of how that's going to change in a minute, but just some overall little statistics that might be interesting. The 15,000 students have liked the rolling up to school with sweatpants and a t-shirt and not giving a shit page on Facebook. So, you can wear whatever you want to class. You can wear sweats, you can wear pajamas, and nobody's really going to say anything. If you wear sweats or pajamas to work, that is going to be a problem because appearance is the #1 characteristic employers associate with unprofessionalism. So that is not a great thing to appear unprofessional in your job. You need to wear appropriate attire. We're going to talk a little bit about travel. So about 67% of four-year students live on campus. So if you're at a UC or CSU, you generally are on campus or right off campus within walking distance. So you're not driving very far if you're driving at all. Versus the average round-trip commute is 45.6 minutes for a working professional. And this is a national average. We live in California, the land of traffic, so it's actually a lot longer in California probably. I know my husband has a 45-minute commute each way, an hour sometimes if the traffic's bad, and he leaves really early before traffic time. So it can be a problem. In California, it eats up your time, and all over the nation, of course, but it eats up your time to have to travel. So you have to really weigh that in your time management once you become a professional. Vacation time, and this one makes me really sad. The average college student gets about 22 weeks of vacation per year, whereas the average professional gets about 2.5 weeks of vacation per year. So you guys get winter break, spring break, and summer break, and then professionals get 2 weeks, usually maybe a little more, depending on where you work. And actually, vacation is not a guarantee in the United States. So you may work at a job where you don't actually get guaranteed vacation. Money, this is one of the upsides of being a professional. About 65% of students worry about having enough money to make it through the week. Whereas the average starting salary for a college graduate is about $48,000 a year. And this, again, depends on your major, depends on where you live, but you'll have some money as long as you budget appropriately in order to pay for your living expenses. So as I mentioned, we're going to talk a little bit about what to wear. So here's a couple of people. You can see they have, some matching stripes, but this is more of a college outfit. You're going to see it looks like the guy on the right goes to, UC Santa Barbara or something, looks like a surfer guy. And we have, jeans and just a shirt and kind of hair, whatever, a hat, shorts, flip-flops. These aren't super appropriate for a work environment. The woman on the left might be able to get away with it in a very casual environment, but it's not going to be seen as a very professional appearance. So here's a little bit of a makeover. So she's wearing, a nice, very professional dress, and she has a nice professional bag and heels, and her hair is done in a more formal way. And she would definitely be seen as professional in a work environment. Here's a makeover for the surfer guy. He has his hair pulled back. This is, business casual, but he definitely looks a lot more formal than his previous outfit, dress shoes, slacks, and a button-up. He's not wearing a tie or anything, but he definitely would be seen as more professional than his previous outfit. So you want to remember that what you're used to wearing in a college setting, even if you don't wear sweats, it may not be at a high enough level of professionalism for our work environment. Talk a little bit about work culture. Different organizations, companies, etc., have different cultures, and this is important to understand so that you can get used to the culture that you're in and really make sure that you are adhering to the appropriate work culture. So what do I mean by culture, period, or work culture in specific? This generally refers to a system of shared beliefs, values, and norms that shape behavior. So what do the people in your work environment believe about how to dress, how to work, how quickly you need to respond to emails, what the way to act in meetings, etc. Values, what's important to your organization. Is competition important? Is making a lot of money important? Is answering the client immediately important? Is providing service important? And norms, what is normal? What is considered appropriate for that workplace? So things that come into the work culture are laws. So that can really affect work culture. If, for example, you work in healthcare, there's a law called HIPAA, which protects patient confidentiality. And so there are things that you're really going to need to be careful about because that's really related to this work culture. Versus if you're in a different setting, you can talk about clients' background and things like that without worrying too much about it because there's no law protecting that. Although it may be unprofessional to do so. Language. So I'm not just talking about different languages that are used like English or Spanish. I'm talking about, the different acronyms and technical speak that are used in different work environments. So when I first started at UC Davis, they used so many acronyms that I had no idea what they meant, and it took me a lot of time to start to understand them. And I would have to ask people, say, oh, I'm sorry, what does that mean? So getting used to that language that's used in the environment and starting to be able to use it yourself is important. Fashion. So as I mentioned a couple of times, different work environments have different cultures in terms of what people wear. So, I think it's kind of known that some tech companies are all about hoodies and jeans, but if you work in banking, you better be wearing a suit. And this may differ even from department to department. So, for example, at UC Davis, at the Internship and Career Center, we were fairly casual, but we saw students, so we needed to be professional. But we could get away with things like maxi skirts or, would wear jeans occasionally, versus people who worked in the office of the chancellor were much more professionally dressed because they were dealing with, companies and donors and things like that where they had to look really professional. Whereas our IT staff, they were very, very casual because they never really saw anybody. So in the, different departments, even the clothing expectations can change. It's also important to start to understand authority and power relationships. So there are structural power relationships. So things are very clear hierarchy of, this person is these people's boss, and then that person's above them, and that person's above them, and this is how the power works, and this is what they have power over. But sometimes there's even power and authority relationships within teams. So somebody who might have been there longer has more authority and power than somebody who's technically at the same level but may not have as much experience. So you want to be respectful of that and start to, sit back and see how that all works before you really jump in. Conflict management. How is conflict dealt with? Is it generally encouraged that you deal with it directly, or do they like you to go see a boss, or do they want you to see an outside party like a negotiator or something like that? How do they deal with conflict? Sometimes conflict is just part of the work environment, and it's something that you may need to get used to. And if you can't, it may be not a great work environment for you. So as I mentioned, sometimes departments and teams can have different cultures. So I'll give you an example of this. At the Internship and Career Center, I first started working with health and biological science students. So that was one team of people. And then later I started working with liberal arts and business students. So a different team of counselors that I worked with. And the culture was different in these two teams. In the health and biological science one, we were really organized, really on top of it. We emailed each other a lot. Versus the liberal arts and business one, we were a little bit more individually focused because we had different populations of students that we worked with, because liberal arts and business is so big. So it was less interdependence and more independence. And so it was different. We weren't emailing each other all the time. We weren't, going down to each other's offices all the time. There's a little bit less of that day-to-day interaction. So that's just an example of, even within the same department, there's different cultures. And finally, behavioral norms. What is okay to do? So, in some environments, it's okay to have a drink with lunch, or, use bad language. In other environments, that's not okay at all. In some environments, it's okay to, make jokes during a meeting. In some environments, the meetings are very straightforward and to the point, and jokes are kind of frowned upon. So you'll get a sense of what the environment's like, but make sure that you adhere to it in a way that allows you to, fit in with the culture and, be professional and appropriate. So some tips for starting your professional life. First, you want to make sure you manage a work-life balance, happiness, and wellness. I always focus on happiness and wellness, but I think that's really important for you to be able to be successful in a work environment. You need to take care of your health. Find time to exercise, make sure you're eating healthy, have plenty of time to rest and exercise to maintain a healthy life. So, some work environments have very long hours. Figure out how you can make sure that you're not, totally overwhelmed by the work there, that you have some breaks, that you actually take your lunch because you are legally, allowed to take a lunch. So, just making sure you have that sense of balance is really important. Timeliness. That is one of the things that can make you get a bad reputation very, very quickly, is if you're late or you leave early a lot or you take really long lunches all the time, especially when you're beginning your professional life. But always you should be timely, but it's especially important when you're new. Show up on time. Ideally, show up a little bit early. Leave on time, so don't leave early. You may even stay just a few minutes late just to show how dedicated you are, but in terms of your work-life balance, don't stay too late. And, make sure you're very aware of your lunch hour, and that you actually are, only taking the amount of time that you are allotted from your organization. Talked a lot about what to wear, but dress the part, figure out what people are wearing. So I worked in an environment where I was more dressed up than everybody else. And after a while, I sort of settled into the culture and started wearing a little bit more casual things. And I fit in a little bit better. And it was, part of my job was that I never really saw anybody. So that's just what people wore, and it was okay. One of the biggest pieces of advice I can give you is don't be afraid to ask questions. Ask questions about the culture. Ask questions about opportunities for you to grow. Ask about, why things are the way they are. Ask about how certain things are handled, how projects are handled, how, the copy machine works, right? You have to ask these questions to get used to it. And If you're new, especially, they're expecting you to ask questions. Most employers expect to be training you for about a year. So, it's not like you can only ask questions during your first couple of weeks. As you, get more comfortable, new and more complex questions will come up because you are taking on new and complex tasks. So find somebody you're comfortable asking questions of. And it also shows that you're engaged and you're excited about your job and that you really want to do a good job. So I'm going to leave you with some key words that are various aspects that make up professionalism. Everything from your appearance to being honest in the work environment. If you mess up, admit it. It's much better to do that than to hide that you made a mistake. That's something that we hear from employers of student interns all the time, that, oh, they made a mistake, and if they just admitted to it, it would have been fine, we would have fixed it, but they tried to hide it. So don't do that. Accountability, making sure that you know what you're responsible for, and then following up with that. And again, if you make a mistake, making sure you try and fix it and let anybody who needs to know about the mistake know. Self-improvement. Part of being a professional is growing, is taking opportunities to do trainings or go to conferences or learn new tasks. Have a growth mindset about your involvement in the workplace and really be trying to get better at things. And also, you probably won't be at this job forever, so making sure you gain extra skills will make you more employable later if you decide to change jobs. Independence. This is a problem for a lot of students, is they often don't realize that they need to take initiative for things that need to be done. They're used to being told what to do because in a classroom that's often the case. It's very clear what the expectations are. Everything you're supposed to do is on a syllabus, and you have somebody to ask questions of. In the work environment, you're often more on your own. So if you see something that needs to be done, do it. Don't wait for somebody to tell you what to do next. Start to understand what's required of you in the work environment and just do it. And sometimes that's not going to happen for a while, right? Because you have to learn how the department works. Don't do things that are inappropriate. You have to figure out what is within the scope of your job. But once you get a sense of that, making sure that you don't just sit around twiddling your thumbs until someone tells you what to do is really important. Respectful communication. So we're going to talk a lot, or we have talked a lot about communication in this class. You're going to want to employ a lot of those skills to the professional work environment, and make sure that you are more formal in the way you address people and the way you write your emails and things like that. You don't want to talk to your boss the same way you talk to your buddies in most cases. We talked about timeliness, but you also want to think about dedication. Even if this isn't your forever dream job, you want to show dedication to this position. You are growing, you are learning, you are improving your resume, you are preparing yourself for the next job, which might be the dream job, or the job after that, which might be the dream job. So please, show your dedication and put all your effort into the position, even if it isn't the exact one that you want, because most people don't get their dream job upon graduating from college. It's about stepping stones, and you want to leave a good footprint on that stepping stone. So remember all of these things about professionalism and all about interviewing, so you can get into a position where you are able to be professional, and you'll be more successful as a student and beyond.